Hello, Bill.
Good morning, Matt.
Welcome to the DMZ, everyone. Our post-Thanksgiving show. I hope everybody enjoyed last week's episode. A lot of good feedback on your Woodrow Wilson, rant. Let's call it rant in defense of Woodrow Wilson.
You know, I want to keep going on this, but I feel like the world has moved on, so I may not be able to dig deeper. But I may, in some capacity, if not in a published column, maybe on my feed. I actually want to get into the parallels between Wilson and Margaret Sanger, because as you know, many on the right accuse Sanger of being a racist. And her story there is also kind of complicated the way Wilson's is complicated. They're not exactly the same. But it's all part of that same period of early 20th century progressivism that, from my perspective, you want to, it's an important story to be told accurately. It's not the cleanest story, but, facts are facts. Like Wilson, Wilson didn't defend the KKK, and Sanger actually spoke to a KKK meeting, which gets brought up on the right a lot. But she actually was not. But she was not racist. She worked with W.B. Du Bois. Du Bois was on the board of one of her birth control organizations. She was pro eugenics, which is not good. But it was not on racial grounds. Excuse me. So that's where it gets complicated. Anyway, probably not the topic du jour today. There's a lot of other stuff going on of import.
I guess we should start with another horrific shooting. We don't even know. This is the next day, Bill, that we're taping this.
We're Thursday morning.
Taping this Thursday morning. The shooting happened, I guess, around 1 o'clock Eastern time. Wednesday,
something like that,
and we're still don't know exactly everything. I don't think we really know the motive. For example, it seems like it's not 100% clear, but we do know how Twitter has handled this, and we do know that. That there have been that the culture basically another front in the culture wars has been opened here.
Because we can't talk so much about the specifics of the shooting because so much is unknown. One thing we can talk about, I know you're hesitant, man. I know this runs the risk of tearing at the fabric of the DMZ. So I give you on my DMZ pledge to keep this within DMZ boundaries.
All right. Okay. So let me just start with my take on it.
Okay.
Okay. So the shooting happens. Immediately, I saw people like Marcos Melitsas. I wish I had it in front of me now, but he said something like, "Hey GOP, this was one of yours." So immediately, I think he assumed that this was like a white Christian, that this was going to be another. So he was scoring political points almost immediately and assuming that this guy was going to be a white Christian, that this was like sort of a mass shooting, in the vein of I don't know, Columbine or Charleston or.
The exact quote from Marcos is, "Yo, GOP, kind of hard to talk about, quote, keeping people safe, unquote, when your peeps are shooting up America." That was what Marcos said.
So again, very premature and unchivalrous, and then also just, this is immediately in the wake of finding out about the shooting. And it turns out he was wrong. Like, we don't know that much about the shooter, but I do think we know that at least two of them were Muslim. Not to say that this was an Islamist-inspired attack. We don't know that yet. But anyway, that was premature. I think what really got under my skin, though, a lot was how you had so many reporters, and many of them seeming to be like ostensibly mainstream, allegedly unbiased reporters, who are really insinuating that, okay, enough is enough. We have to have gun control now. And if you don't believe in that, and by the way, there are multiple reasons to not believe in it. Number one, efficacy. Do you think that gun control would actually stop this? I don't. Number two, constitutionally, do you believe that it's appropriate constitutionally to have gun control? But so many reporters really going out there on Twitter and basically saying, enough is enough. If you don't believe in gun control in the wake of this, you're a horrible person. And so I'll stop there and let you kind of go for a while.
Well, I agree with you about Marcos's tweet. I mean, that was, we'll get into what I said about the Planned Parenthood shooting a little bit, because I'm getting caught up in this sort of argument too. But I don't think it's at all legitimate to take a murderer and then say that person is part of an entire demographic cohort. And never mind the fact that Marcos wrote that before he even knew the background of the shooter.
I don't get that. I really don't get that.
That's sort of the danger of Twitter, is that you or even more so than blogging, you don't have an editor. you do things on impulse.
But this is true. But this is also, I mean, this is not his first rodeo. I mean, this is a guy who's 40 years old, probably, who's been on Meet the Press, who's, this isn't somebody who's like going to fly off half-cocked. I mean, we all make mistakes, but this is pretty egregious. Egregious.
Well, I think that, to go to your other point about gun control, there is, massive frustration, certainly on the left, perhaps beyond the left, that no matter how horrific the shootings get, that it seems impossible to get any kind of gun control measures passed. Typically, the political system responds to crisis, and it doesn't seem to respond to any of these crises. And so I think that's generating a lot more, heated commentary. So some of it, which I think is out of bounds, like what Marco said. Some which I don't think is out of bounds, but may not be helping from a practical standpoint. For example, you have a Senator Chris Murphy, who started this whole debate over the value of prayer after these sorts of events. So he tweets almost immediately yesterday, "Your thoughts, quote unquote, should be about steps to take to stop this carnage. Your prayers, quote unquote, should be forgiveness if you do nothing again." Now, this sparked Igor Volsky at Think Progress to go on an extended tweet storm, taking every Republican politician that was offering prayers to point out how much money that person got from the NRA, and saying that this is essentially money, so you will only pray and not take action to stop gun violence. You have the New York Daily News covers with the headline "God won't fix this," criticizing some of those same tweets from Republican politicians, and so that's now caused a other debate whether the left is prayer shaming or prayer mocking. Go ahead.
Well, no, that's the headline here. Is the prayer angle, and I do want to get to it, but I feel like I have to make another point before I can get to that, which is I think that certain issues have certain skews, and so if it's an ISIS attack, I think Republicans are very comfortable talking about that, and if it's and by the way, it's possible that this one will turn out to have some Islamist flavor to it. We don't know. If it's sort of a Dylan Roof type shooting, that skews toward liberals. They want to talk about the Confederate flag, and both sides probably demagogue and score political points. But the gun control issue, this poses a real problem for conservatives. And from my standpoint, I'll tell you why that is. And it's because, so number one, as I mentioned, we sincerely do not believe that gun control would stop things like this. And we also sincerely believe that we have, a constitutional right to keep and bear arms. And there's a fear that any sort of encroachment on that could be a slippery slope that would lead to more and more gun control. And so, so we doubt the efficacy of gun control as well as the constitutionality of it. So that's a sincere. Now, you may disagree, but that is a sincerely held belief that I have, and that I think a lot of conservatives have. But the problem politically is that people are biased toward action, whether or not don't just stand there and do something, right? I mean, whether or not that action will make a difference. And we can talk about things that contribute to these sort of events. Maybe it's our culture. Maybe it's violent video games and movies. Maybe it's mental health. Maybe you should be able to institutionalize somebody much more easily, which, by the way, has its own civil liberties concerns attached to that. But there are multiple possibilities. And then obviously some of these horrible incidents, not as many, hopefully, but some of them are just going to occur no matter what. Just as liberals often say, you can never really fully stop terrorism, that it's always going to be possible in a free society. So, but the problem again is that that we are biased toward action, and whether or not gun control would actually stop these events from happening, the easiest thing to say in the aftermath of this is that we need gun control. And so Republicans are just inherently on the defensive every time things like this happen. In terms of the mainstream media, I actually think in terms of the general public, in terms of the long run, the fact that you haven't seen more gun control is indicative of the fact that the American public is more or less with conservatives on this issue. But in terms of dealing with the media, if you're a Republican or a conservative and you have to go on TV today, it's going to be a rough day. Not because you're on the wrong side of the issue, but because you're on the wrong side of the media, and because the easy thing to say is the thing that you can't say, that you don't believe.
Well, I think the difficulty is that, I mean, you sort of brought up sort of the two ways one could approach this generally. One is to say, this is a problem that demands action, and these are the actions that I think would curtail it, whether it is gun control or whether it is mental health policies or whether it is surveillance tactics or a combination of all of them. You believe this is a problem that requires some sort of government response. The other take you could have is these are not matters that government is able to solve. These are acts of individual violence. We can't prevent all types of crime. That is an impossible goal. And we have to, keep calm and carry on in these types of situations. I think the problem I think this is a problem for the right in domestic mass shootings. It's a problem for the civil libertarian left when it comes to international terrorism. That people don't want to hear. There's nothing we really can do. We want to do something. So to get back to the prayer discussion, I don't think anybody on the left is saying it is bad to pray and that your religion should be mocked if you do so. The argument is that we think it's ridiculous to use prayer as a shield to mask the need to talk about policy solutions. Oh, it's too soon to talk about actual solutions here. Let's just pray. That's the kind of thing that gets under people's skin. Now, as far as the practicality of making that point now, considering the backlash that we're seeing, maybe it's not the best argument to get into today, but I don't think there's anybody saying that prayer in and of itself is deserving of mockery.
I think there are some people saying that, but that may not be a fair representation of the people. There is. I didn't tweet this because this is the kind of thing that I think if I tweeted it when I thought of it, it could have blown up, but it would have made a point I don't believe in, and then I would have had to. Then my subsequent tweets would not have been retweeted. And what I might have tweeted was this: pray as if it all depends on God, work as if it all depends on you. That's a better way of putting it. But my next tweet would have been, of course, gun control. I don't believe that gun control is the kind of work that's going to solve it. Well, that part wouldn't have got retweeted, and you only have 140 characters. But no, I think there were people. I mean, the Democratic Party is, as I recall, the party that booed God at a national convention, and there were people who were.
I probably can't let that one just go unanswered.
Okay, go ahead.
I don't know what the reference is. That doesn't sound right to me.
This is like a football. I'm called for un-DMZ-ish behavior, or unsportsmanlike conduct. All right, let's strike that from the. Just have that stricken from the record.
Okay.
But no, I saw people like I can't remember who because I don't keep an enemies list or keep score. But I saw people say things like they would take a tweet where a politician said, keeping the victims and their families in our thoughts and prayers, and they would take that tweet and on top of it, I don't know what this is called in Twitter vernacular, but they would retweet with that and say like F your prayers, F your thoughts and prayers, or F you, but it wasn't F, it was the word, which I've been banned from using here in the DMZ by my wife. But so anyway, no, there were,
and that's not a very nice way to make the point.
Right, and I got I think that there was certainly the suggestion by some that prayer. There is a suggestion that prayer doesn't work. That it's that it's not only that it's a misdirection or a shield, but that it's pointless. And I was happy. Let me just say though, I was happy to see there were people like Anna Marie Cox, and there was a piece at The Atlantic that was very good. So, mainstream, center, left, liberal, whatever you want to call them, people and outlets who made the point that, there's nothing wrong with prayer, and that sometimes people, that's what they need to do during times like this.
Well,
so there are people who push back on that, yeah.
Well, where I think this gets to a cultural fault line is for the Daily News to say God isn't fixing this is a misunderstanding of the point of prayer. I mean, no one is praying to say God stop these killings because people who are practitioners of prayer know it doesn't work like that. It's about trying to.
I mean, look, we live. I mean, just theologically, we live. If you are a Christian, we live in a fallen world. And obviously, we must grapple with, and this is, philosophers have grappled and theologians have grappled with this from the dawn of time, that obviously bad things happen to good people. And the question is, how can a good God allow bad things to happen? And there's theological reasons for that. But that doesn't mean that prayer doesn't work. And that doesn't.
It's working in regards to how one copes with grief. Not
that is part of it.
How does one solve policy problems?
Well, that's a fair point. And I mean, look, I believe, there's the whole, faith without works is dead kind of thing. And as I said earlier, pray as if it all depends on God, work as if it all depends on you. I mean, any of us who work in the public policy or political or opinion leader realm certainly believe that even if there's a spiritual realm that God's in charge of, we have our part to play on this earth, and we have our mission to try to make the world a better place. And the question, though, is, does that mean gun control? And I would argue that although I agree that I have a responsibility and we all have a responsibility to actually work to make this world a better place, that gun control is actually counterproductive to that. But the assumption is, but I think the assumption is that you cannot hold that view. Well, I think the assumption is anybody in their right mind who believes that we must take action, or that we are not just passive, participants here in this world, clearly must believe that the way to do it is X, Y, and Z.
Well, I think that is the majority view of the country. It's not the majority view of Congress, of course. And it may not be the majority view in key swing states that Democrats need to win to win the presidency, which they have managed to thread that needle the past couple of elections. But I think where it gets tough for conservatives is if your belief is gun control doesn't do the job. And I think there are certain gun control. I mean, I've written in the past that you can't assume that just background checks or just closing the gun show loophole, that these things are panaceas. These are at best experimental provisions that I think you want to try to see how well they do work, but I think it's false to assume that they would solve the problem instantaneously. But if you don't believe that at all, then the burden of proof is on you to say, here's what I think would work. If you're coming from the place of, I think action is warranted, well, then what is that action? And what are you doing to make that action become reality? We don't see Republicans do that very much.
Well, apparently there is a mental health bill in the House right now. I don't know the details, but that's one possibility. I mean, I think we should look at, and this is another tough issue. I alluded to it earlier. Should we be allowed to basically institutionalize people more easily? Like, if I suspect that my cousin is unstable and dangerous, should I be able to have him or her institutionalized? That touches all sorts of civil liberties issues.
Yes,
and I could certainly see libertarian leading conservatives not wanting to live in a world where people could just have other people put away fairly easily.
And the NRA chief tends to say that. The NRA after Stanek was like, let's lock up these lunatics, which, is right. Easy to say on TV, hard to really execute in practice without getting something wrong from time to time.
Right, but but these are going to be difficult choices we have to make, and that might be a conversation we want to have. I mean, because I think what we want to do is we have to be sensitive and this is such a tough issue because we obviously have to not trample on constitutional rights and civil liberties, which this encroaches on multiple ways potentially, whether it's the gun control issue or the mental health issue. But we also want to attack what is the most likely to solve the problem, actually. And I would probably think that healthcare is more likely to solve the problem, that mental health, than is gun control. In all honesty, although I know that is easy. A liberal will take what I just said and they will accuse me of playing politics. Like what? Let me just ask though, like to that person, say that like, what skin do I have in that game? Like, I don't own a lot of guns. I'm not an avid outdoorsman. I don't get any money from the NRA, sadly. Like, what skin? Like, what is my, unless I philosophically or sincerely believe this, like, what is my angle to this? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I don't know. What is your angle?
Yeah. Where's my Maserati?
I don't get it.
My dad was an avid hunter, but he didn't have any quote unquote assault rifles. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
One year he killed 3 or 4 bucks, legally. Muzzle loader, bow and arrow, and rifle season, and we had venison all winter long to eat. That was cool, but I don't think
you're not providing venison to your family now, if I'm correct.
I think my wife would be the better shot. She got amazing vision. She can spot things that I don't see. I think, if push comes to shove, I have to get her out in a deer stand or something. Not a lot of hunting in Alexandria, Virginia. I think I could trap squirrels. They are plentiful.
Well, I want to shift to the Planned Parenthood shooting for a bit. I also want to get to your piece about.
So we're gonna segue into a lighter.
Right.
Okay.
So in the initial aftermath, I had a tweet where I said, the war on Planned Parenthood has killed a volunteer pastor of an evangelical church. The officer that was killed was also a pastor at a Colorado Springs church. And a number of conservatives got angry with me, both on Twitter, but also in written form. You had Molly Hemingway at the Federalist said that I first she criticized my friend Jessica Valenti, and then she said this journalist speaking to me took things even further. And then you had Tim Carney at the Washington Examiner do a piece where he was talking about people demonizing people's opinions over this, where I was quoted. And from my perspective, it is not fair to say that you're not allowed to hold anti-abortion, pro-life positions in the wake of this. You certainly can oppose the federal funding of abortions without being pilloried, but there's something specific in this case which I think is relevant, which is there has been an active, in my view, a smear campaign against Planned Parenthood, the organization, based on these propaganda videos that are heavily edited and have been fact checked by factcheck.org and PolitiFact as not backing up the claims people are basing on those videos. Color Fiorina in particular, but others as well. That's been going on now.
All right. I have to just jump in and say, well, I'm not going to flag you for un-DMZ like behavior. I just want to go on record. We've talked about this before.
Yeah.
And so I don't want to relitigate it, but I'm playing this part I object to the premise that Bill is setting up, and I'm going to play this part in protest. But
okay, all right.
Anyway, I just want to say that we don't have to fight about it. Now go ahead.
Well, I mean, it's just a fact that when I say war on Planned Parenthood in my tweet, I meant a rhetorical war. There is a rhetorical war on Planned Parenthood. I mean,
I will agree with that. I think it's justified, but I would agree clearly. I agree with that part of your premise.
And some people on the right, understandably, say, "Well, what about the guy that shot the security guard at the Family Research Council over gay marriage? Are you responsible for that?" Obviously not. And just in the case of Planned Parenthood, the people who are pushing the line are not trying to instigate violence. But in the case of the Family Research Council, there is not an organized attack campaign on the Family Research Council. There's people who want equal marriage rights. There wasn't this months-long drumbeat to go get the Family Research Council, which is what you're happy now with Planned Parenthood. Now, even if you think it's legitimate that they're the target, the fact is they're a target. And so someone has taken the fact that they're a target, and we know now that he said after the shooting, no more baby parts. We know that he had put glue in the locks of abortion clinics in the past. So this does not seem to be a random some people at the beginning think maybe it's just sort of a random happenstance they picked the Planned Parenthood as his location. I hear people on Twitter say, well, he didn't shoot the workers there. He shot a police officer, so it must not be about abortion. I mean, I think and that strikes me as being extremely obtuse, especially considering what we know right now. So even if you think it's legitimate to go after Planned Parenthood, at minimum, I would say if you, it is not true for the foot soldiers here, but for the leaders who are pushing the line, maybe it's worth a rethink. You know, on the prayer sharing thing, it's worth a rethink whether going after people's prayers makes sense, considering you're getting this big political backlash over it. In the Planned Parenthood case, hey, 3 people just got killed. Maybe it's worth a rethink whether this is the best way to articulate your pro-life views. No,
I would. So you mentioned You mentioned the Family Research Council shooting. There's no doubt that there were, liberal activists who've, said bad things about Family Research Council and all that, but it wasn't mainstream to the degree that the attacks, quote unquote, attacks on Planned Parenthood were. But I just think we have to be very careful here. Somebody else put this idea out there, but let's say, for example, and I was on Bill Maher right in the wake of the Charleston shooting, and he made this weird allegation that the Daily Caller, where I work, somehow might have instigated this attack, which is just absurd. I have no idea where it came from.
I mean, that was absurd.
But I pointed out that he made this documentary that was religious, or making fun of religion. And that would be like me accusing him of having some culpability if a church is burned or a shooting takes place there. I wouldn't do that, because is it possible that that crazy or unbalanced people get caught up in this sort of toxic political rhetoric? Yeah, of course. But what would happen if tomorrow, and this is the part that someone else brought up on Twitter, if tomorrow somebody stormed Wall Street and killed some Wall Street hedge fund brokers or something?
That happened in 1920.
Okay, if that happened tomorrow, let's say, would it be fair to talk about Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders, their rhetoric as having caused that? And we really need that. I would say that would not be fair. And but to me that's analogous to what we're doing here.
I mean that did happen in 1920. There was a lot of extremely heated rhetoric towards financiers, and there was a terrorist attack on Wall Street as a result of that, which led to a huge loss of civil liberties for a period of time.
Wow. So interesting. You should write about that, Bill. I think you've got your next. I think you've got your next column.
Maybe. People on the left and the right have been beating up on Wall Street now for a good 7 years, and we haven't had that, thankfully. So I can understand people might not feel a need for restraint because it hasn't actually caused anyone's death. If people did start dying, I imagine there are people on the left that would say, okay, maybe we got to sand off the rough edges here because people are taking this too far. It doesn't mean that Elizabeth Warren would be at fault or Bernie Sanders would be at fault. You wouldn't haul them into court. You wouldn't violate their First Amendment rights. But as a practical matter, you'd say, well, maybe it's worth thinking through how we go about our issue here. If for nothing else, not just to save people's lives, but for your own sake, for the sake of your argument. It doesn't do the pro-life cause much good if people are hijacking it and murdering people, and you are then not doing any kind of recalibration after that.
That's for sure, but I don't see how these the videos or the effort to defund Planned Parenthood. I mean, that's an entirely legitimate thing to attempt if you're a Republican. How that was irresponsible or
Well,
in other words, I wasn't seeing irresponsible rhetoric about baby killers and this is war. So what I saw were videos which I think are legitimate, and an effort to defund them, which I think is legitimate, even though I was against the shutting down the government part because I thought that was just stupid. But in other words, I didn't see anything that was incendiary or might be irresponsibly provocative.
Well, I mean, just to back up what you were saying before, I mean, I agree with 99% of what you're saying. I don't think it's fair to ascribe blame for people who just articulate their opinions just because someone who is deranged takes that opinion and use it as justification for a murderous rampage. That's not your fault if that happens. You can't control what people who are unbalanced are going to do with words. I think there is a distinction in this case with Planned Parenthood because you've had an active, and I know this is under protest by you. I would say it's a smear campaign. It's based on falsehoods. It has not been backed up by the facts. We've had prosecutors look into it, filed no charges. You still have Carly Fiorina, just to give one example, saying there is footage of a breathing, kicking fetus being hacked up, which is literally not in the video. But people still believe it to this day. That's the kind of thing which I think is beyond the pale, and you now see someone using a falsehood to justify a murderous act. That I think deserves some rethinking. Okay.
I would just say, and I'm not going to rehash the conversation we had months ago, but the other example that is not as hypothetical as the Wall Street example that someone else brought up was the Black Lives Movement. And then you have, about a year ago, I guess it's called a setup, basically an ambush where you had, 2 or 3, I think, New York NYPD officers who were, killed, who were targeted. Is it fair to blame, to sort of wave the bloody flag, so to speak, and to indict the Black Lives Movement for that atrocity? That stuff happens. I mean, people get this. These are the games that people play.
Well, I mean, I think the rhetoric around police violence is very hot. Violence against police officers is actually down. It's not an epidemic. It's the opposite. But there are examples where it happens, and there are a handful of cases where it seems to be political in nature. So from that vantage point, it would probably behoove the Black Lives Matter movement just to be a little careful how you articulate. I mean, obviously, it's an emotional issue for a reason because you have African Americans dying at the hands of police officers in many cases, and we have video footage of it. So you can understand why the rhetoric would get hot. But it certainly behooves that movement to be careful how broad you paint that brush, because someone could very well take it into a murderous direction that's not going to be helpful to anybody. So yeah, I mean, I think there are some parallels there, potentially. But I think my point still stands that let's not. I mean, particularly, abortion's a hot subject because there are people who believe that it is murdering babies. Black Lives Matter is a hot subject because it is indisputable that African Americans are being killed by certain police officers. But you don't want to unleash murderous ire on all abortion clinics. You don't want to release murderous ire on all police officers or any abortion clinics. So if you're in a leadership position, it just behooves you to be a little more careful.
Oh, I would agree. I mean, I would agree with that, because the worst thing that could ever happen, I mean, you know what, I mean, the word, I think I said this before, is when President Obama took office, Republicans should have hired a security team to keep him safe. Like, the worst thing, God forbid, that could ever happen to Republicans would be some stupid idiot to go after the president, right? That's just how it works. And if you are a devout pro-lifer, I mean, aside from the fact that it's like completely irrational if you believe in the sanctity of life to try to kill people, if you care about that cause, then obviously you would not. The worst thing that anybody who is a pro-lifer wants, the last thing, is for something like a shooting at Planned Parenthood to happen. So I think we agree on that. The one thing that I would say, however, is I do think that it's very important for us to vigorously defend political speech. And I do worry when we get into a point where we start talking about dangerous rhetoric that inspires violence. The way to solve that is to tamp down on speech, and that I think is something we have to be very cautious of.
I'll get a few minutes where I have to jump. I want to give you a chance to talk about your theory that the left has some responsibility for the rise of Trump, which you wrote about at the Daily Caller.
Yeah, this is controversial, surprisingly. When I got my book Too Dumb to Fail, and when I just assumed that the most obvious critics of the book would be, sort of Tea Party conservatives who weren't happy that I was pushing back against Trumpism, or who just didn't, frankly, care much for sincere criticism or constructive criticism, that would call me a rhino for daring to suggest that Republicans aren't perfect or that they need to modernize, not moderate. But I've started to see glimmers that it's likely I'll have some on the left who do not like this book as well. And that's because they want to paint the story of conservatism's downfall, or of the dumbing down that's happened. And specifically, they want to paint the story of what's happening with Donald Trump having 30% of the Republican base supporting him. They want to sort of use that with a very broad brush to indict all of conservatism. This is the inexorable result of the Southern strategy and Richard Nixon and the evil Ronald Reagan, and the chickens are coming home to roost, and Donald Trump is the result of the horrible things that Republicans, the natural result of all the stuff they've been doing. I mean, I utterly reject that view. So my book obviously points out that there has been a dumbing down, and some Republicans and conservatives are in many ways complicit. In fact, as you know, Bill, I even talk about how Reagan may have inadvertently contributed to some degree, even though I love Reagan, he's mostly a hero in the book, that he may have inadvertently contributed to this in some ways. But I think that it's complex, and as you know, Bill, this book talks about all sorts of underlying factors, including, I go back in time and look at what the GOP lost when it won the South. So that's part of the story as to what happened. And I look at evangelicals, the addition of evangelicals, and how that has in some ways, even though I am an evangelical, it has in some ways sort of negatively impacted the GOP. So it's very complicated. I also look at the rise of technology and Twitter and cultural trends. But the one thing I think we also do have to acknowledge, I'm not saying it's the only or even the primary thing, but some of what has created the rise of Donald Trump is a backlash against Obamaism and liberal political correctness. And that is part of the story. And yet, when you make that argument, there are some on the left who want to immediately push back, and they do not want to concede anything in that regard. And so I wrote about that at the Daily Caller.
Well, we are less than 2 months away from the momentous release of Too Dumb to Fail. Are we 5 weeks, 6 weeks?
I don't know, Bill.
You need a countdown calendar. You should have like a clock around your neck.
I should. Well, it's right before. It's just a matter of a couple days before the Iowa caucus. It's like 4 days before the Iowa caucuses or something. 4 or 5 days. So, batten down the hatches should be fun.
Get your pre-orders in now. You don't want to. You want to be the first one to have it. You don't want to be the last one to have it. That's no fun. You want to be the first one to have it, so you can impress your friends and neighbors that you know exactly what's going on in the Republican Party and where it should go from here. Yeah, no,
I think it's I hope it's an important book. I think it mixes history. It's not just. This goes back to Aristotle and Edmund Burke and William Wilberforce and John Quincy Adams and Jackson. A lot of stuff. So it's not just like the latest 5 years. It looks at a lot of interesting. It goes back to the Scopes monkey trial. A lot of interesting stuff. And I think that you'll learn something, because I learned a lot as I was writing it and researching it. I think it's a commentary on what's happening today, but I think it's going to be, if you're intellectually curious, if you like history, ideas, it's a lot of stuff in there for you as well.
We're going to leave it on that note because I have to run, but always good to talk to you, Matt. I think we DMZ'd this. We got through.
I think we DMZ'd the hell out of this episode. So always a pleasure, even when we talk about tragic and horrific topics, we try to do it in the DMZ spirit. So thank you guys for tuning in, and thank you, Bill, for being DMZ-ish.
Thank you. Take care.